Welcome back to Great Debates. I know we've been gone for a little while. I'm Jhmeid Billingslea. I am the Managing Director for Sterile Processing and Surgical Operations with Advanced Support Services. I am joined by my partner.
Hi, I'm Angela Lewellyn, and thanks for joining us. I'm the Director of Development and Research at Advantage Support Services, and I'm so excited today about what we're going to share with you. Big topics, especially when we are auditing, when we get the privilege to audit some departments, we find this as a challenge most of the time. So Mr. Frank Daniels is with us today, and I'm so excited about this talk, Jhmeid.
So we have a superstar with us, right? A super rising star in the industry. We have the Director of High-Level Disinfection and Sterilization at Virginia Commonwealth University Hospital in Richmond, Virginia. You've probably seen him speaking in Barcelona for the WFHSS. I present to you Mr. Frank Daniels. Woo!
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, Frank. We are going to pepper you with a bunch of questions, but right now you are one of the hottest performers in the HLD industry. So our questions are going to be kind of from the perspective of I'm in my facility and how do I get closer to what you're doing in your facility? So one, tell us a little bit about speaking in Barcelona, and then we'll have some questions about what you're doing in your department and how we can copy that in our departments.
Well, just to touch on Barcelona, very fortunate to go there, and speaking about a controversial topic is Bororscopes. People are like, hey, it costs so much. Is it really worth doing it? And my goal was just to make people think, hey, what exactly is this guy talking about? So I was psyching myself out because a lot of people don't practice borescoping on a regular basis. And yeah, just wanted to bring attention to it. So it was definitely eye-opening. Had a lot of questions over there, a lot of good questions. And yeah, since I've been back, I've received numerous emails. People are asking me, how can I start this? Or what can we do to start doing borescoping within our hospital itself? So it makes me feel appreciated just because so many people have reached out.
So when you say controversial, what do you think is really controversial about Bororscopes? Because I'll tell you what I think. I just want to hear what your answer is.
Well, see, controversial is we know what's going on now. It's no longer a guessing game. I can tell you exactly what's going on within the working channels of the scope. I can tell you if it's ready to use on patients. Not everyone wants to see eye to eye there because you're opening up a whole new world to people. And, change isn't always the best thing for some people.
Angie, what do you think is controversial about Bororscopes when it comes to flexible?
I think the controversy and the pushback we get when we're doing audits is the technicians are responsible to use the borescope for all the lumens, and the time they have to invest in that extra step, they just don't take or see. They can't understand or don't understand or have the right information, enough education to understand the importance of it. Because if they did, they would never skip the step. So I think, it just kind of dominoes into lack of education means lack of quality assurance steps, because we're not understanding what's really happening inside that scope or that lumen. And I think the time constraints with the staff shortage is the biggest issue with Bororscopes. That's what I see.
So I would agree wholeheartedly, but let's talk what's really the real deal. People want to drive their car with the check engine light on as long as they can until the engine falls out. And when they finally take it to the shop, when you send your scopes in for repair, then you find out, well, a lot of the damage was all that time you drove around with that check engine light on. We don't want to look at the scope, one, because we don't want to go and fight administration for the cost of getting enough scopes to do it right. But then the second part of it is, if I look, then does that mean the scope is down? Does that mean they're not thinking about it from a enhanced patient care perspective? So tell us a little bit about what the results that you've gotten by borescoping so much, and how often do you borescope?
Well, great question. Hey, I started off, hey, I want to do every scope once a quarter because I'm like, hey, we have 511 plus scopes now. How in the world am I going to get to all these scopes? So yes, once a quarter.
That sounds reasonable. If I'm a viewer and I'd have scopes like, oh, I could do once a quarter.
And once a quarter was working for me, and then I was like, no, I can do better. My team, I have such a strong team. We can do better as a team. So we went once a month. And then, I just quite not happy with that. So then I was like, okay, let's go once after every use. And then the big question I always give people, oh, that's taking so much time. But then I tell them it's 3 to 5 minutes. It's 3 to 5 minutes worth of your patient's life. And then after I tell them that, present that to them, usually they'll say, okay, it's not so bad.
And to piggyback on your point, it's going to take a long time when you first start scoping, right? It's not going to take 3 to 5 minutes the first time you do it. But to your point, as you incorporate it as a part of your scope cleaning and high-level disinfection workflow, then you get better at it. So the thing is, if I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, well, I'm fine with once a quarter. And then if I get to monthly and I say, I'm kind of fine with monthly, what you're discovering may make you say, I need to do it more frequently, whether it's weekly or every scope. But regardless, whatever you're doing, whatever the extra time that it's taking when you're doing it once a quarter is not the time that you're taking when you're doing it every time, every week, or even every month. So I like how you proved that you're a proof of concept for those of us who advocate implementing borescopes as a part of it. And so while we're kind of surfing around elephant in the room, let's talk about what brought this kind of controversy of to borescope or not to borescope, to be Shakespearean a little bit. So it was the update in ST91, right? Amy ST91. How did that impact you? And was that a part of the reason that you started doing it more frequently, or were you already doing it more frequently before ST91?
See, ST91, grateful that it came out because it kind of put a spotlight on everything that we should be doing. It didn't really affect me as much. The only thing I had to change with what we're currently doing is I was doing a random sampling of scopes instead of having them criteria in high risk and not high risk. So now we do all high risk, we test, as well as we do another random sampling of all the other ones. So that was the only little step for that. As for borescoping, COVID changed the world. And I wanted to keep my team together, so I wanted to make sure, what can we do to make our practices better? So the year 2021, we went ahead and borescoped all scopes that are coming into the hospital brand new, as well as all the ones that we sent out for repair. Within all that happening, we had 28 failed scopes. And let me tell you, 8 of them were brand new. You're thinking, well, you're getting a brand new scope. Why should it have anything in it?
Sounder, I would go. Let's play that back again. Out of the scopes that you were scoping, how many were brand new from the manufacturer?
Well, the ones that failed were 8 brand new scopes.
Wow.
And I don't know about you, but if I buy a brand new car, I want everything good in it. I don't want bad leather or interior. So it blew my mind.
I have a question, Frank. If we think about you're now testing or borescoping every lumen scope after each use. My question is, does everybody in your department, is everyone in your department acclimated to performing that test, or have you created a super user? And then this follow-up question to that, Frank, would be, if you, when you were beginning to, every technician was using that borescope, were there challenges with some damage to the borescope, or just learning curves? How did you get to every technician getting that knowledge?
Yes, with a borescope, we all know it's not the cheapest thing in the world. It's a little higher than a candy bar, but not as expensive as a car, So we made this investment. We wanted to keep our investment safe. I initially started off, it was just myself, my coordinator, supervisor and a senior tech were the only ones that were allowed to borescope. And then I had people on my team, this very strong team, they're like, I want to borescope. I want to see what we're looking for. You say it's very important. Why can't I do it? So we go from the super users down to, okay, everyone's doing it. But in order to make sure everyone's looking for the right things within the scopes, we wanted to make sure they're competent. So we started off, it was a competency every 6 months. And then I saw an opportunity to increase the learning capability. So we went every quarterly. With that being said, I will randomly, if I see some issues, I'll do it monthly. But for right now, quarterly seems like it works for us.
That's a big difference from what we see around the country, right? Because Angie and I are blessed to go in and help departments turn around, and we typically don't like their annual competency, much less you doing a every quarter competency. So that's a big deal. Speaking of those people you're getting those competencies, have you endorsed them seeking a certification? I think there was a presentation at Amy by Garland, one of the members of ST91, actually the co-chair, that talked about designating people specifically to do scopes and the value of certification. So can you tell me about what your requirements are at VCU as far as certification for people, process, and scopes?
Absolutely. I started this about 8 years ago with the certifications. You have to obtain your CFER or your CER through HSPA or CBSPD. You have 2 years to complete it. So far, out of the amount of employees I've had, I've only had 2 individuals not able to pass it, and it was different circumstances for that. But when an employee starts here, I try to do a grassroots system. And people say, well, what do you mean by this grassroots system? They don't see my room for the first 3 weeks they're here. The first 3 weeks, we're learning the foundation. Majority of people don't know what high-level disinfection or HLD stands for. So I'm getting people from all walks of life. We're sitting there, we're going over the basics. How can I expect for someone to process completely if they don't have a solid foundation in order to do it?
Besides Bororscopes, are you using any other cleaning verification tools in your scope process? And if so, which ones? And if not, why not the others?
All right. Yes, I am doing for all high-risk scopes, as we know for ST91. I'm doing all high-risk scopes, and I do a protein test on those.
Hold on, let me take a time out here, Frank, because we're assuming that everybody has read ST91, but our practice shows that that's not true. Tell me about what is a high-risk scope versus a non-high-risk scope according to ST91.
All right, so yes, high-risk scopes is going to be your readoscopes, cystoscopes, bronchoscopes, your ERCPs, anything with an elevator. Yes, those are the ones that we have to test. We want to make sure that they are getting clean. But the misconception that I see a lot of people, okay, well, we're only going to focus on cleaning those. And it kind of puts the other scopes out of the light. At the end of the day, any scope can hurt you. So you got to be consistent with all scopes. And that's why we definitely test our high-risk ones. But we go a little step further. We do a random sampling of all the other ones, because I'm not going to sit here and let one of my patients get hurt by not putting those just as important as the other scopes. For example, ERCP, 12 years ago, this scope is hurting people. We can't clean it right. That had all the limelight. But in the background, bronchoscopes are hurting people. Cystoscopes are hurting people. Well, there's been evidence in cases for all scopes right now, flexible scopes that are hurting people. They all have to be in the same limelight and the same focus with cleaning.
You just sang the song that I like to sing the most. When I tell people about, we go over high-risk scopes, but what I tell people is the next high-risk scope is in your department. It just hasn't had enough incidents, enough mod reports to become that. So I like, when you're talking about cleaning verification methods, I like to do those cleaning verification methods on all scopes so that you don't have to have your technician there like, is this on the list of high-level scopes? Now, random sampling is a different matter. But when we're talking about the pure workflow of cleaning and high-level disinfection, I would recommend to make it very simple to new viewers who are watching this and saying, I'm trying to get from where I am to where Frank is, to say, listen, these cleaning verification methods, we're going to use on all the scopes so that we don't have a single person that can blow up the thing because they weren't sure if this particular scope was in the high risk category or the low risk category. And we know there's really no such thing as a low risk category when it comes to flexible scopes. But I just really wanted to hear you kind of preach from the pulpit on that. Didn't really want to interrupt you, but back to what you were saying about other cleaning verification methods that you use.
So yes, on the high risk scopes, we do a protein test. And then I was like, okay, well, I want to go one step further and make sure everything is a little different. So I try ATP testing. That's what I do in my random sampling. I do that because it's so easy. It's not able to fib the test. As soon as I do it, boom, it shoots it off to a dashboard. I know it's done. I can go back and reference that very, very easily. So I do both the best of both worlds, because some people say, oh, protein's the best, ATP the best. Well, you know what? I'm going to do them both.
I have a topic for debate, okay? So if I think I'm going to, now this is the controversial side and way, might be too extreme. So I want y'all's opinion, right? There we go. All right. So let's say I borescope my flexible endoscopes once a month, right? And now it's March 1st. I'm gonna do these flexible endoscopes that just came down, and they haven't been inspected internally, right? Until last time it was February 1st. So now I inspect this scope and I see so much debris in there that looks like it's not fresh. It's been in there a while. It's kind of caked on the side of this thing. The question is, would you treat that like a positive BI for sterilization and have to go back to the last negative test you had for sterilization? So, and then reach out to all those patients that were contacted or had contact with those instruments that were in that load of sterilization? Would you do a recall of some sort? What do you do with that? Because you just scoped something on March 1st that's full of debris that's been there forever. What do we do? How do we think about the patients that this was used on in the last 30 days?
To me, it's a twofold question. The first one is, hey, this is the data I need to go and help me get more resources from my manager or C-suites. Hey, we have a known issue. This is why we couldn't have done it. If we were able to allocate more resources, maybe an FTE or another borescope, hey, we could have got this question ahead of time. But ethically speaking, I feel you would have to reach out to those people that scope was used on. There's nothing worse than not knowing. Why wait and possibly hurt more people when you can get it off at the forerun, where you can stop and say, hey, just to let you know, we'd like for you to come in. Maybe there's a couple tests. Maybe there was something associated with that scope. Maybe somebody else got hurt from it. We don't want what happened back in 2010 to happen again to our patients.
Sure.
Ethically speaking, that's what I feel you would need to do.
Good question, and great kind of answer. And what Angie kind of did was present the model of every load testing for those of us who have oversight of sterile processing. When we say, well, that's going to cost $1,000 a month or whatever it is. But going back, when you start thinking about how much does it cost to do those recalls, to have risk contact those patients, it really does push you towards, as you gradually phase in, starting off. I don't think anybody should look at this great debate and go and say, hey, yeah, Angie said we should do every scope test. Frank said we should do every, but as you start phasing it in, what you see should drive your results, right? If you're doing every month and it looks fine, then maybe you don't. But if the more you see, the more you as a leader or even as a technician have an obligation to stop the line and do the right thing.
Well, if I can just say one more thing, when I stated earlier, I was stating that, hey, I want a Bororscope monthly. That was my minimum. That was never my maximum. I can always do more than what my minimum is. So that it leaves you leadway. If you see that issue that Angie just talking about, hey, well, now I want to do it, every other week, just for this scope, just to test it out. You set your minimums, and then of course you want to feed off of that. Then that way you can perfect what practices and policies you have.
One of the things I want to emphasize for those viewers who have that one Bororscope that they're trying to share between SPD and a flexible scope is something that Frank said, is that he believes wholeheartedly in Bororscope, but he also implements more universal and easier to perform tests on every scope, such as protein cleaning verification, which are available for multiple stations. And there's one that's very easy to use and use a dipstick on it, and ATP testing. So if you're saying, I don't have the resources, I can't go from, one, you got to eat that elephant one fork at a time. But the other thing is there's other very low cost solutions that you can start implementing next week. Like, you may not be able to get a Bororscope or more FTEs next week. You can order protein tests and an ATP tester next week. Neither one of those are capital.
Good point.
And it's something that you can start doing that goes with your program so that you can kind of catch some of those things as you start developing that training and that frequency of repetitions to get to that every boroscopic pause.
And then that's when you use your data to help you get your resources you need. You get a lot of positive tests coming back, then you're going to need to do something to prevent that, right?
Very much so. Very much so. Very much so.
Great first phase, Jhmeid, right? That's a great way to start a quality program for these scopes and an inspection program. And it also introduces that extra step to technicians that may have not done that before. And as you gradually increase those steps, you get to a Bororscope steps, eventually getting to 3 to 5 minutes. It's like no big deal, right? Easy peasy. I had a question. So if I'm a manager from sterile processing and I'm responsible for all these scopes, we don't have a Bororscope. We're doing the best we can with, we have 15 people, 15 FTEs, and 6 of them show up a day. And what am I going to do? So what kind of money does it take to get the return of investment? How do we get a return of investment on a Bororscope or any inspection tools, or even the extra FTE that it takes to maybe implement a super user in these endoscopes? How do you see the repair cost? What is the differences of having a Bororscope and inspecting it versus not?
Great question. A Bororscope is, like I said, it's not a cheap investment. Like I said, it's not expensive, but not cheap, but it is an investment, and you have to look after your investments. And return of investment on a Bororscope, you can look at it in many different ways. You save one patient, hey, your investment's already well equipped then. But then when I went to Bororscoping after every use, I've noticed that my repairs are cheaper. So now, instead of getting a major repair sending out, I can see, there's a flaw in the bending rubber. Let me send that out. Instead of paying, that $6,000, $7,000, $10,000, now I'm spending, a couple hundred, maybe $1,000. So my repair cost has drastically decreased since then. And just another ROI from it, because I'm tracking, big data person, tracking over the last 6 months, last 2 quarters, and my repair cost has decreased significantly just by Bororscoping after every use. So that 3 to 5 minutes has also helped my patients, but my bottom line budget as well.
That is a great point. I think one of the things that we all know when we're bottom line responsible for those scopes, and sometimes our team, our technicians, and certainly the end users don't know. When you send a flexible scope out, you don't know how much it's going to cost. And also, you don't have any choice, right? Because If they say it's 10,000, well, that's less than the 93,000 to replace the whole scope. And so when we're always trying to pitch pennies and say, well, can we afford the little cleaning verification things? Can we afford the ATP swaps? Every time you send one of those scopes out, if they say 1,000, you have to pay it. If they say 10,000, you don't have any choice, because the cost of each scope is so expensive that even the most outrageous repair bill is less than that. And you don't have to go through the whole capital purchase process. So that right there is a great argument for return on investment, in addition to the patient safety element. So, one of the things that Angie and I talk about is, how can we help managers, supervisors, or even technicians, specialized technicians, justify some of these enhancements to their C-suite? And you've done a great job of laying that out for us.
Did using Bororscopes decrease surgical site infections or return patients to surgery?
Well, that's a sticky question. Fortunately, here we go through a rigorous process of training, and I feel that my team has always cleaned well. With the amount of failed Bororscopes, I've been doing every scope, after every use of every scope, Bororscope testing, and altogether we've only failed maybe a dozen so times since October. And you're like, okay, well, how many have you done? Well, we've done at least 13,000 Bororscopes since then. So it's not like, hey, we're less than a 0.001%, did it help? It might have helped, but now it's more of a peace of mind, instead of, hey, we can't say we're contribute to HAIs or whatnot, but you got to start with that cleaning process. Rule of thumb is, you can't sterilize and you can't disinfect anything that's not cleaned properly. So that is what I preach on when we start. It takes my team about 15 and a half minutes in the sink. People say, oh, well, it takes me 4 minutes. Well, if it takes a minute or two for the chemical to start, how are you cleaning the scope in 2 minutes? You looking at it? I would challenge them every time, but 15 and a half minutes. Now with an ERCP coming, it's going to take, 3 or 4 extra minutes, because there's so many more steps. But my team overall, after you get that buy-in from them, they clean correctly, and we have contests just to make sure, hey, is this person cleaning as better than another? And it's made it fun atmosphere when one person is challenging the other about how they can clean better than the other one. So healthy competition that helps everyone.
That's awesome. That's a great way to do it. I was wondering if, acclimating, you said you bring people in the first 3 weeks, they're in school, right? They're kind of acclimating to the sciences, the rationales, the reasons, the standards, but the IFUs, just following the IFUs, seeing an IFU. When we're in sterile processing, Jhmeid and I, and we have educators out there in the field, they get an opportunity to possibly share IFUs in huddle time, right? We don't pull people off of production into a classroom. But the way that your model is set up, it's just as phenomenal, because you're getting them access to the IFUs, to the standards, to all the sciences and the rationales, what's going on in the scope. Do you round your team into an endoscopy suite to see procedures or how the scopes are used at all?
At first I wasn't, and then our rooms are kind of small. So after you have an endotech in there, and then a physician, and then maybe a nurse in there, it doesn't leave a lot of room. But we're in 2023, the world of YouTube, and you Google any case and they see it. And then we went one further. They can't process anything without being competent. When we do our competencies, when new hires, part of that competency is they have to go back to the IFUs. Do they read everything? They read everything when the cleaning verification side of it. The other side of it, I would stay there for probably a year, because I'm sure you've seen some of these IFUs where they're like 500-600 pages and they're not getting any shorter. So
right.
We try to stick to that cleaning.
Steps, 147 steps.
So yes, that's part of our process. They have to identify the IFUs. They have access to it on 3 different ways. We have an intranet site that if it's not on there, we're not processing it. My team knows that. If it's not new or barcoded by myself, then we don't process it. It's a couple hard stops to keep everyone safe.
That is wonderful.
Yeah,
Oh my
that's
gosh,
great.
that's so good.
There's a couple of Amy ST91 questions that I wanted to ask you because we see it out in the field. How are you dealing with the drying, the extended drying recommendation? And how would you deal with it if you didn't have the fancy dancy equipment to perform it?
Great question. You know, drying is the way of the future now. It's being hit on. We know that gravity doesn't always do its job when you're dealing with scopes that have a 90-degree turn on top of 180, and then it's going to magically dry itself. Anything with a lumen here at my facility gets put into a drying cabinet, and it stays in there for an hour. It guarantees that the internal is dry, and then I believe 3 hours for external. External could be wiped down in emergent cases, but anything with a lumen goes into a drying cabinet. Now, you know, we're in 2023. Technology is developing all the time. There's machines that, hey, within 10 minutes, I deem the internal lumens are dry. I've seen 12 minutes. I've seen 15 minutes. They all have a place for within the process itself. If I have an emergent case, hey, I'm going to address why don't I have enough scopes for that case? Maybe look into increasing our inventory if needed. But I'll have this device here where we can put it on. Boom, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, we're done. Here you go. I can't wait to get it again and reprocess.
That's wonderful.
Great information. The second thing I was going to ask you, which is we see a variety that is compliant, and which one have you chosen? How do I get the scope from your central processing hub to the end users and ultimately patient use?
Of course, you know, anytime you're dealing with a scope, dirty or clean, you better wear gloves. I mean, I didn't spend all this time high-level disinfecting a scope and not use gloves to infect it before it gets to the end user, you know? So, of course, we're using our gloves, and we put it into a rubber plastic container. And then we put a green bag over it. That way it notates clean. But then we go one step further. We put a hard see-through plastic lid on top of that. All right, so now I got two barriers. I got the green bag, that's a barrier for the container, as well as I got that lid that goes on top of it. That way there's no dropping, no spilling. I know it's clean. And then we have another bag for it when it's dirty. So I know green's good, red's bad. So let me get the red one to reprocess, and you take the green one for the end user.
That's a great process. That's a great 5S simple process that uses visual identifiers to tell people who may not have been around when it's processed, and especially our end users, our patient care advocates that are concerned about getting that scope to the patient, but sometimes may not follow all the visual cues that are available. So great process.
I know you've invited some hospitals to round to see your process when we talked earlier. So is there any words of advice or wisdom you can share with the managers and technicians out here trying to do their very best?
Yes, just keep in mind, at the end of the day, it's for our patients. You know, our patients are our loved ones. It could be our brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts. It's anyone walking in your facility. Your job and sole job is to keep them safe. Use your resources. And if you don't have the resources, use your data. Data goes a long way in allocating those extra resources or getting that extra Bororscope or whatever you need. And maybe another FTE can make sure you don't have delayed reprocessing. Got to stick with your steps and policies. Focus on everything that needs to be done with the scope. So many resources out there from many different associations. And yeah, one step at a time. You're not going to be able to run before you crawl.
That's great advice.
Great tips. Where can our viewers find you on social media if they have some follow-up questions?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Frank Daniels, same face. I think I got hair now. Before I shaved my head. So yes, please, if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, Frank Daniels. It says VCU Health System right underneath of it. More than happy to help.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions about the entire process, Jhmeid Billingslea on LinkedIn, Angela Lewellyn, how can they get in contact with you on social media?
I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can look up Advantage Support Services as well, just to see all of us, and we're all kind of connected on there. So Jhmeid and I are easily accessible.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels, for joining us. And this won't be your last time. As everything comes up, we're always going to kind of pull you in as our high-level disinfection subject matter expert.